My name is Carolyn Burnham. I am a volunteer for the Batavia Environmental Commission, and we have been partnering with the Batavia Library since last fall on environmental programs. So thank you very much for coming to this event. A lot of people don't know that you can actually fight climate change by composting, and maybe Claire will talk about that a little bit. I just want to point out that there are programs on your seats for you to look at for programming coming up that the Environmental Commission is involved with. The first one is a wildflower walk at Fermilab that's on May 18th. We're excited to get back there. We had to take the date we could get. Just know that you have to register through Fermilab, and everybody needs at least a real ID to get in to the event. We'd love to see you there. It's a lot of fun going there. It's the first time we've been able to get back there since the pandemic. And there's also a river cleanup on May 18th at the same time. So you got to do one or the other, but I'm sure that there's plenty of you that are needed for both events. I hope you can join us. And we also have a program coming up in the fall on electric vehicles. So hopefully some of you in this room are interested in that. Tracy McFadden, who's a speaker at that event, really knows this stuff. So he can talk about what's inside the car and all the rebates and the tax credits and really what it takes to own an electric vehicle. Also on the back table there is a survey. The library would love you to fill that out at the end of the event. If you have ideas for future environmental events, we'd love to hear. So you can fill that out, and maybe we can bring some speakers that really interest you for events down the road. Let's get started with our speaker tonight. Claire Ryan is here. She has been the recycling program coordinator for Kane County for about 2.5 years. In this role, she is responsible for maintaining and implementing the county's solid waste plan, planning and hosting recycling events, and for public outreach and education. Claire first learned about compost growing up from her stepmother, who was an avid gardener and maintained a backyard compost pile. Today, Claire has her own backyard bin and a thriving worm bin that is stashed under her desk at the county. She holds a dual master's in environmental science and public administration from Indiana University in Bloomington. So give a welcome to Claire.
Hey, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. This might be the most multi-generational group I've spoken to in a while. I love to see it. I am so excited because compost, being nature's climate champion, it says on that rosette, can really form the future for our young people in some ways. In case you didn't know, it is actually International Compost Awareness Week. So the timing for me to be here talking is good. They have a design poster contest every year, and that's the poster for this year. And yeah, it's really a chance for folks involved in the compost industry or just who want to educate on it in the community to get out and talk about dirt. So here I am, I'm excited. Just a quick overview of what I'll talk about today. We need to start with a definition. This might be review for many of us, but what is composting and what is compost? And just a little bit about what it isn't as well. We'll look at some of the environmental benefits of composting, how to compost in Batavia and elsewhere in Kane County, but kind of focused on Batavia. That'll include some curbside pickup services, drop-off locations, and then do-it-yourself will be kind of the back half of the presentation. For do-it-yourself composting, we'll start by looking at outdoor systems, essentially compost bins. We'll look at how to get started, how to maintain a pile once you have one, and a little bit of troubleshooting, because it can be tricky. And then I have just a couple slides about, it's kind of maybe a more advanced class, but I have just a couple slides on indoor composting if folks want to try it, including worm bins and bokashi fermentation. And then hopefully I'll have plenty of time for questions. So composting, the verb, it's an action. It's the controlled decomposition of carbon-based material, you'll sometimes hear it called organic material, in the presence of oxygen. And I've taken this definition from the United States EPA. I did reword it just slightly. So the important parts are kind of underlined. It's a controlled process. It's not just throwing things in a heap and just hoping it turns into something. There is some work involved. You will sometimes see carbon, like the material you're composting, called organics. I do want to point out that it's not the same as USDA organic. It means carbon-based. It means it was once living and growing. It doesn't have to be USDA organic to be composted, but if you have your own bin, you can choose your inputs. And the presence of oxygen is important. That's kind of what defines compost as opposed to other types of decomposition. So who performs the act of composting? Well, it's people who control the process by selecting the location of their compost system, by selecting what material gets added and adding it, and by maintaining the oxygen and moisture levels in the system. But the actual transformative work of turning compost, or turning organic material, whether it's yard waste or food scraps, into black gold for the garden is done by bacteria, for the very most part, but also fungi and macroorganisms. So these are your creepy crawlies. Your worms, mice, sow bugs, etc. are actually an important part of any compost system, not just a worm bin. Compost, the noun, so that would be the end result of a composting system. It's a soil amendment that includes organic carbon, again, chemically organic as in organic chemistry, not necessarily pesticide-free, plant nutrients, and an assortment of beneficial micro and macroorganisms. Once it's done, compost should be dark in color, have a mostly uniform texture, similar to a nice healthy soil, and be mostly odorless. There'll always be a little smell. It's going to smell like dirt, but it shouldn't smell like rotting stuff, or else it's not quite cooked yet. You can add compost to essentially any mineral soil to provide plant nutrients, to improve the biological community of the soil, and to improve water retention. So mixing compost into the soil creates basically void spaces or pores, big holes where water can infiltrate in and just kind of sit until it's taken up by plants. So in times of drought, compost can make all the difference in terms of having to irrigate your garden or not. Just some examples of how compost can be used in the landscaped area. You can top dress lawns or existing perennial beds or potted plants. Top dress means you put the compost in a thin layer on top. You don't disturb it to get it down into the roots. You just put it on top. You can create custom potting mixes by mixing compost with any garden soil, sand, peat moss, or other material depending on what you're planting in the pot. You can certainly incorporate it thoroughly into any plant bed creation or a renovation project. So if you're kind of starting over with something in your garden, that's a great time to incorporate a lot of compost. And you can also use it liberally in any holes you've dug for new plantings, no matter what it is. If it's a tree, an annual, a perennial, you just dig that hole and put in some compost. Put in your plant, tuck it down. So, possibilities. So that's the garden uses of compost and why gardeners call compost black gold, because it's free and it's a really big benefit to the garden in terms of nutrients and water retention in that soil too. But from an environmental standpoint, we talk about composting as well because it can reduce the amount of food waste and other organic material like landscape waste that is going to landfills. Food waste is actually the #1 material by weight that is being landfilled in Illinois. and it accounts for 17.5% of the total weight of material in landfills. So households are responsible for a portion of this. There was a really interesting study and infographic done by Reuters last year. I have a link to it down here, but what they found, they were trying to track where food waste was primarily coming from. And they found that 63% of the landfill food waste in this country is coming from households, and 30% is coming from the food service or restaurant industry, and other large food servers like institutions like hospitals and stuff like that would be in that category too. So it's not coming from farms for the most part, and it's not coming from food processors for the most part. And even retailers, they've kind of figured out how to keep things out the landfill, but we haven't yet. Anaerobic decomposition of food waste in landfills releases methane and carbon dioxide quite a bit. And they say, Reuters as well in their study said worldwide, landfill food waste accounts for about 1.6 of all human greenhouse gas emissions. So it's not the biggest thing in the world. It's not like, ending all use of fossil fuels overnight or anything. But it's still a reasonably big percentage. Illinois EPA's most recent forecast is that the existing landfills in the state will continue to serve our disposal needs for 19 years. So in terms of a human life, that's kind of a long time, but in terms of our society, not so much. Here, I keep touching this, it's sensitive. I went the wrong way, okay. It's very difficult and expensive to permit new landfills, so, while we can do it, it's not gonna happen overnight, and, Kane County board, not that it could never change its mind, but at the moment, it has an ordinance stating that it will not site any new landfills in Kane County. So the more we can do to reduce our waste, just in general, the better, because that means we're not trucking it all over the place to get landfilled. But also, if we can keep our food scraps out and compost them, that's going to reduce the methane emissions coming from those landfills. So options to compost in Kane County. Most residents of single-family homes already have seasonal curbside collection of compost. Compostable material is taken somewhere to make compost, and that's yard waste. So there was a state law passed back in 1991 that banned landscape waste, as is defined in the law, from being landfilled. And it's defined as being material generated from the routine care of lawns, shrubs, vines, and trees. So grass clippings, leaves, shrub and vine prunings, fallen leaves. It's an interesting definition because there's a lot of things people assume is included that isn't, but that's by the by. So what happened when this law was passed? All of a sudden landscape waste can't go in the landfill. Where is it going to go? So it kind of birthed an industry of specially permitted composting facilities to process specifically landscape waste. These facilities do tend to be seasonal. They're open and operating from April 1st usually till November 30th. They process in big windrows. They're these big kind of mountains almost of material. They process it into compost, and then they do sell the compost for various uses. But under the type of permit that they have, they're not full pollution control facilities like a landfill would be. So under their type of permit, 90% of the material at the facility at any given time has to be landscape waste. That means that up to 10% can be other compostable material. That includes food scrap, animal manure, etc. So that's kind of what that little factoid, that 10% stuck in folks' minds, and it translated into what we call ride-along food scrap programs, which is where a municipality's trash hauling contract includes seasonal collection of food scrap with yard waste. So essentially the food scrap is a hanger-on, or it rides along with the yard waste. It's not its own separate collection. So 42% of all hauler contracts serving the county include one of these ride-along provisions, and I've listed them all out there in case any folks are from other towns other than Batavia. You can see if you're on the list. There's a very broad variety of how well these things are advertised. Sometimes it's like the town's best kept secret, like no one knows about it. The city of Batavia does have information about it on their yard waste page, on the DPW website. Who's your hauler? Groot. I bet Groot does not have anything on their page for city of Batavia about it. The haulers are, some of them are a lot more enthusiastic about letting people know about the service than others. But here I am, letting you know that in Batavia, through Groot, you have two options to dispose of organic material curbside. You can choose to put it in craft paper bags with stickers, or you can use a cart subscription. Your sticker price, I just did the math here, so I'm a cart renter, not in Batavia, but in North Aurora. And if you do the math, you're paying $3 per sticker, and you have a 30-gallon bag per sticker. So if you put in the cost of bags, $3.35 is going to be your weekly cost for one bag. 65-gallon cart subscription is this much a year, which works out to $4.87 per week for the 37-week yard waste season. If you get a bigger cart, it works out to $5.15. So either cart is cheaper than putting out 2 bags of yard waste. It really just depends on whether you do your own landscaping or not, probably which makes sense for you. But anyway, regardless of whether you use the sticker program for yard waste or you have a cart, you can mix in acceptable food scraps with your yard waste. Those include fruit and vegetables. This is directly from DPW's website. So fruit and vegetables, whole and scraps, including pumpkins. Non-liquid dairy and eggshells, so cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese. Yogurt's a little drippy. Personally, I don't think I'd put it in a yard waste bag. The cart's fine, but grains, it means cooked grains, so bread, cooked pasta, cooked rice, cereal. If you just had it left over, if it spilled on the floor, you don't want to eat it, that kind of thing. Coffee grounds and filters, tea bags, I did put a star here. I'll have a picture later, but it's tea bags as long as they're made of paper. And they're these kind of like plastic mesh tea bags. You don't want that in compost particularly. And then napkins and paper towels. Please don't include meat of any kind, bones or shells, oils or grease. Any packaging, even if it's marked compostable, that would include any plastic bags, even if they're marked compostable, paper plates, food service items, that kind of thing. Pet waste, it is an organic material, but it is too gross for the facilities to want to deal with. It doesn't necessarily break down very well. Diapers fall in the same category also, they're full of plastic. And liquids in general. So if you have leftover coffee or tea, you shouldn't pour it in your yard waste tote. There are a few other options if you'd like to have someone pick up food scraps from your home. There are 2 farm-based businesses that I know of. These are the only ones that I've heard of. It doesn't mean there aren't possibly more. But they will collect separated food scraps from King County households on a subscription basis. One is called Our Sustainable Journey. Now, their website is up there. Their service area is limited to I guess you could say the southeast corner of King County, but Batavia certainly falls in there. Another one is called Elder Oaks Farm. They just renamed themselves. They used to be called Full Bushel Farm, but Elder Oaks Farm is the same business. And that one's located between St. Charles and South Elgin on the west side of the river. But I think probably for most of Batavia they would come. And usually what that kind of a service looks like is they're going to give you a 5-gallon bucket for your food scraps, or you start with your own bucket. And then they come collect that and swap it out with a new clean bucket. And that's just kind of how you go. But it is, of course, an added cost. Other options, if you want to compost material in King County, there are some drop-off locations. So there's Pushing the Envelope Farm, where King County has done its pumpkin smash. I'm gonna come up here and point to it because I don't think you can see my cursor. It's that one, so that's probably the closest. And then Midwest Compost has 2 locations. One up in Elgin, that's the one in kind of next to South Elgin, but the one much closer to here would be 1195 West Washington Street in West Chicago. Those both accept any of the food scraps that was on the last slide, so plant-based food scraps essentially in their compost piles. Pushing the Envelope Farm, their compost pile is basically just out there. So anyone can use it. Midwest Compost is probably going to have a drop-off fee. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, though. Creekside Compost, that's the one out west, south of Elburn and Sugar Grove. They're a full-blown yard waste composting facility, but they probably would accept any drop-offs of mixed yard waste and food scrap. And same with green soils management, though that's way up in East Dundee, so I doubt too many folks from here would go there. So with all these different options to drop your stuff off or get it picked up, why might you consider composting at home? Well, you get compost for free, so if you're a gardener, that's automatically should be kind of appealing. It is going to have a smaller carbon footprint than any kind of collection because you're keeping it local. You're not, burning fuel to drive it around. You can separate food scraps year-round. Now, composting doesn't happen year-round. If you put material on your pile during the winter, it's going to freeze. But then it unfreezes when everything else does, and you can just mix it in. And so it doesn't quite have that seasonal element that your yard, like through your yard waste program, is going to have. And then also, this is probably going to be more important to some people than others, but it's a way to have quality control of that compost. So if you're growing your own vegetables, you might want to know what material went in. Did it have any pesticides sprayed on it? If so, what were they? Because there's a broad range. And then non-biodegradable contaminants. Usually if you buy commercial compost, it's going to have some fragments of metal or plastic or even glass in there. They try their hardest to get all that out, but it's very, very difficult. Whereas you're the boss of your own compost heap, and if there's plastic in there, guess whose fault it is? And trust me, I've had produce stickers in my compost plenty of times. I'm not judging. So I want to let you know kind of what the options are for doing your own composting. The obvious kind of one that most people have heard with and most people associate with composting is having an outdoor bin or heap of some type. So the first thing you kind of need to think about is, are you going to buy an enclosed bin? Do you want something fully enclosed? Do you want something open air? There's a lot of different models. So this one is a fully enclosed tumbling composter. Like this one too tumbles. It has a slightly different mechanism. And definitely fully enclosed. This one is fully enclosed, and the nice thing about this, so it actually is going to have 2 openings. The top, there's like a round top that pops off, and that's where you add your new material. And you can harvest the compost through a little kind of window that opens up. There's a little door at the bottom. So that can be nice. And then these are going to be your more contained, open air heaps. Some of them are kind of DIY. This one looks like it's made out of some spare siding. This one is made out of old pallets. This looks the most like mine at home. I bought a kit made out of kind of heavy gauge wire mesh, and it clips together on the corners. Some things to think about when you're trying to decide, do you want fully enclosed or open air? Well, one might be the size of your property and the relationship with your neighbors. If you have a very, very small property and you're going to have to put your compost close to a neighbor and they care about such things, you probably want to go with something fully enclosed, because they don't attract animals because they're fully enclosed, and they look more just structural and orderly. Whereas certainly you can, if you maintain an open air bin well, it shouldn't be a problem. But they do require more maintenance because you can and definitely do get weeds that just take root and grow in there. Animals can get in obviously and scatter them unless you build it with a lid, which is an option. Either way, you don't have to DIY if you do an open bin. They sell kits for those as well. And one of the benefits of the open air is you don't have to irrigate it and monitor the moisture quite as much because it's going to get rain on it. There's pros and cons either way. You do want to try and put your compost bin somewhere that gets at least 6 hours of sun per day. It just helps speed it up. If it's in the shade all the time, your composting is just going to be slower, possibly very slow depending on how shady. So once you've kind of decided what container to use and either bought it or built it, the step to starting compost is to build a lasagna, we like to call it. So you're going to layer a bunch of material. And the first layer should be about 6 to 8 inches of organic material with at least half, preferably quite a bit more than half, preferably about 70% being browns. You'll hear me say composting greens and composting browns. So your browns are going to be your carbon rich materials. It would be dry leaves, shredded if possible, especially if it's like oaks, which take forever to degrade because of the amount of tannins they have in them. If you can get those leaves shredded or mulched, if you drive over them with your mulching mower, that helps a lot. Cardboard, again, shredded if possible. Woody debris, chipped if possible. This would be your, basically any shrub or tree trimmings. Dead plant stems, shredded newspaper, even napkins. Those are all brown materials that have a lot of carbon and not much nitrogen. Conversely, your greens, which should be certainly no more than half of the material, maybe about 30% ideally, are going to be grass clippings, weeds, though I do recommend not putting any weeds with seeds on it in your compost heap. You can cut the seed head off and put it in the garbage, and put the rest of the weed in, but most backyard compost heaps do not get hot enough to kill weed seeds, so your finished compost would be full of weed seeds. And then your plant-based food scraps. Again, it's going to be mostly the same things that you can put in the City of Batavia program, so fruits and vegetables. You could put some dairy in. I don't super recommend it though for a home pile, unless you know it's getting good and hot. Eggshells you can put in there. Trying to think what else. Coffee grounds. Coffee grounds, even though they're brown, they're technically a compost green, I know, right? It's hard to remember. But, oops. Okay. And then once you've got your first layer of organic material, then you're going to put about 1 to 2 inches of garden soil on top. Ideally, it should be soil from the ground, not like buying a bag of garden soil from Home Depot. Because the purpose here is you want to add to your compost heap the local microflora and fauna. So your worms and bacteria that are in the soil, put them in the compost heap. Because again, they're what you need to kind of reproduce and do the work of composting. And then layer 3 is optional. And it kind of depends on how fast you want your compost to proceed. If you really don't care, skip this layer. But if you want compost sooner rather than later, you might want to add 2 to 3 cups of an all-purpose granulated fertilizer. That's like 10, 10, 10. That's nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus. Or I got that wrong, didn't I? Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. There we go. NPK. Or 1 inch layer of animal manure. Horse manure, cow manure, chicken manure are all fine. But you know, not from your dogs. So yeah, that basically provides some immediately available fuel for that bacteria to kind of flourish and really start reproducing fast, and it kickstarts decomposition. So some maintenance on your outdoor compost system. You want to monitor the moisture of the material and maintain a moist but not soggy environment. So if you read anything about worm composting, they say like a wrung out sponge. And I think that's probably what they're going for most outdoor bins too. So when you squeeze it, you certainly want to feel moisture, and you want a couple of drops to form between your fingers. But if you squeeze it and it pours water out, it's too wet. If you squeeze it and you can't feel any moisture at all, it's too dry. In which case you would simply irrigate it by using your hose, or essentially. Or, you know, if it has a lid, you could take the lid off and let rain get in it. There's different options. If it's too wet, you basically want to turn it very frequently in order to kind of let the evaporation happen. Yeah, you want to turn it as many times as you can, or spread it out over a larger area and let it kind of dry out a little bit. The frequency, so you have to turn your pile as well. And you can either do that with good old-fashioned elbow grease and a pitchfork, or you can use a tumbling composter like those ones I showed you in the picture earlier. And the frequency of turning is kind of up to you based on, again, how fast you want your compost to cook. And you know, it has to also match your available effort too. So if you're busy like as I am, I have a 5-year-old, and I'm out giving talks at 7 p.m. So my compost pile does not get turned very often, let me tell you. But that's okay. If you're turning it about 2 to 3 times per week, that's a lot. During the growing season, you should get finished compost in weeks if everything else is right, if your moisture is right and you're adding the right fuel, the right organic material. If you're turning it a few times per growing season, so maybe once a month or maybe twice a month if it's lucky, you'll get finished compost by the end of that season. If you're never turning it, I wouldn't expect finished compost for over a year. It depends what you're putting in and how finely ground up it was. That's the other thing. I had on this slide with the browns, all this stuff chopped up. If you chop it up, things go way faster than if you put huge hanging branches in there. It takes quite a long time for that stuff to break down. So, and you continue to add your brown and green material. You do want to try and add more browns than green. A 1-to-1 ratio, so that's the same amount of brown and green, is the absolute minimum if you're having a hard time finding brown material. but you really want to aim for twice as much browns as greens if possible. Actually 3 to 1 if you want a really hot and fast compost, because once your bacteria is established, it's actually that carbon in the brown material that drives the system, not the nitrogen. Another just kind of point or tip is if you have an open bin, you want to bury the green material, the food scraps, to discourage animal scavenging, flies, etc. A little bit of troubleshooting. My compost pile isn't heating up enough or producing compost fast enough. It's been months, I'm waiting, where's my compost? So kind of in order, the steps would be to make sure the pile is moist and staying moist throughout the season. I think it was a University of Minnesota publication I read when I was putting this together that said moisture is like the #1 problem they see in backyard compost piles. Build the pile larger or insulate the sides and the top. Like a very small collection of material is not likely to build up enough of a bacterial population to really compost very well. And it tends to lose a lot of moisture and a lot of from the sides. You want to turn it more frequently, add a little bit more green material, and add all your material in smaller pieces. Problem, pile smells bad. There's a couple things that this could be, and it depends on what the smell is. If it's like rotting death, probably your pile has gone anaerobic, which means there's not enough oxygen in it. If it's wet, you want to, this is the other way to solve a wet pile, is add a lot of absorbent material, like newspaper would be a good one. You could even get coconut coir, which is usually sold in the garden section of like hardware stores and stuff like that. And that'll absorb a lot of moisture if it's really, really wet and gross. Turn the pile frequently as well. Turning the pile works the oxygen deeper into the pile and stops the problems with anaerobic conditions and bad stinks. An ammonia smell, so kind of more like, almost like an antiseptic smell, means there's too much nitrogen and you want to add more brown materials. Okay, so another problem might be critters or flies. So I just want to remind folks that creepy crawlies, so worms, pill bugs, centipedes, and millipedes, things that go, they're kind of a normal part of the compost community. You don't want to get rid of those. But if you're seeing other animal activities, burying food scraps again or wrapping them even in newspaper, if you've got a really enterprising critter getting in there, might help. Definitely avoid adding fatty foods. So that might include food scraps that have been cooked in oil. Mice love oil. It's a high calorie, nutrient dense food for them. So it does tend to attract rodents more than other material. And then if you're really not having any luck and you just have an enemy squirrel or mouse or something, you might want to try a covered or enclosed pile. Talk about just some tricky contaminants, things to think about when you're putting your material in. Those produce stickers, I once heard this rumor that they're edible because it would be illegal to sell produce with an inedible sticker. They're not, they're just plastic. So, and they'll show up in your finished compost. Rubber bands, these like twist ties, the paper will compost, but then you'll be left with a wire. If you're using corrugated cardboard, any staples or tape are going to wind up in your compost. Even this tea bag, this tea bag has tiny little staples. It's kind of annoying, but they're not going to wreck your compost necessarily, but you would find them in the finished material. And then this guy I mentioned before, that's like a plastic tea bag. You want to make sure you don't get any like gardening accoutrements, like any plant pots or there's certainly plastic plant pots or plant tags in there. And then chemical awful nasty is this black blob under the scallions there. That's a charcoal briquette. So you can't add wood fire ash, just untreated wood fire ash to a compost heap if you want to. Definitely don't add charcoal or treated lumber or like starter log ash though, because they have weird chemicals in them. So I'm mostly done. I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. Because I'm like a recent vermicomposter and I have like 1,000 worms under my desk, I did want to throw these in and just mention that they are a possibility. I had it in my head at one point that indoor composting could definitely allow people in like multifamily homes to compost even though they maybe don't have good access to a garden, but unfortunately I don't really think it's the case because no matter if you do vermicomposting or, well, it depends who your friends are. You have to find a friend that's a gardener that wants your stuff. Or you need to get creative and use something like Facebook groups to like, hey, free compost kind of thing. And that's going to be easier probably with your vermicompost than with bokashi, and you'll know why when I go through them. It's just personally, I don't recommend things that are billed as countertop electric composters. That is a thing now. They're expensive. They usually cost $200 to $300, and all they are is a food dehydrator and a food processor put in one machine. So they grind up your food scraps and then dry it out. And there's not really any benefit to it. They call it a composter, but no composting has happened. You could then put that material into a compost heap, but what's the point? I don't really understand the point of them, basically. So, step one, you're going to choose, and this is not research here, this is just letting you know the options. Choose between vermicomposting with worms or bokashi fermentation. Step two would be to buy or make a tiered worm composting system or buy and make a bokashi tank. So this is a bokashi tank as you would buy it off the internet. This is a homemade one. The most important features of it, it has to have an airtight lid and it has to have a spigot or spout on the bottom. This would be a homemade worm bin. They've got kind of a bin-in-bin system, which I think is smart. I didn't do it and wish I had. And then this is a tiered worm bin that you could buy. So vermicomposting is actually pretty similar to outdoor composting, as in the requirements are the same. You need airflow and oxygen. You need moist but not wet conditions, again, so that wrung out sponge feel. And also a pretty similar mix of browns and greens. So a worm bin brown is their bedding material. And bedding materials that I have used include that coconut coir from the kind of coconut fiber stuff that you can buy from garden centers. Shredded corrugated cardboard, shredded newspaper and paper, fine wood chips, shavings, things like that. And then the worm greens are going to be your plant-based food scraps. Essentially, it is the same kind of stuff that, again, you can put in your outdoor bin. Fruit and veggie scraps, prepared foods, grains, beans, stuff like that. Oops. With a couple caveats, you don't want to put anything acidic in there, so no citrus in the worm bin. And no very salty food either, because they respire through their skin, and if it gets real salty in there, that dries them out and makes them very sad. But otherwise, it's basically the same. I've come to learn that most people don't do this, and I'm a little extra. But I do food process my scraps and bury them in the bin. Because it's in the county building, and my coworkers were very clear that my little experiment in worm farming was over if I started like a fruit fly infestation in the office. So food processing the scraps allows the worms to move through them faster. They're not super thick. They're like thin little ribbony worms. They don't have huge mouths. It just allows them to work the material faster and turn it into worm casings. And I have had really zero odor or pest complaints about the worm bin, and I've had it for a year now. So it does work, but it is a little bit extra work for me. And then you do have to harvest the worm castings or the worm compost at least twice a year. Probably 4 would make your worms happier. The tiered systems, like the one in my last picture, make it easier, because what you do is you put your fresh food, you kind of like let them go for a while with no food till they're good and hungry, like at least a week or 2. And then put fresh food and new bedding in the tier above where they are now, and they will just crawl up themselves, because they want that food. They're permeated, so they can just crawl up. Mine is just a big bin. So I gotta go diving in there and sift through it all. It's not fun. So tiered bin is where it's at. You can use your worm castings exactly like compost, and any drainage. You want to try to avoid drainage if you can, because it means that it's too wet. But if you do get drainage, you can use it to water plants. All right, and then finally, just what is bokashi? Well, it's different than either outdoor composting or worm composting, because it isn't actually composting at all. It's a type of anaerobic fermentation. The reason some people like doing this is that you can put all food scraps, all solid food, through this. So you can put in fish, you can put in meat, you can put in bones, you can put in shells and shellfish and stuff like that. The only things they tell you never to put in bokashi are going to be liquids and any oil or fat, like butter. Anything like that would not be good. The other reason, well, and another nice thing too is you don't have to worry about green and brown. It's just you put it in as it comes. So what you do is you add 1 tablespoon of this bokashi bran per inch of food scraps as you fill up your container. Chopping the food scraps, again, you can just knife chop them, or you could use a food processor if you felt like it. It results in more complete fermentation at 2 weeks. And then, so what you do, you add your material into the system, use a plate or some kind of flat disc to press it down, and then put the lid on, and keep doing that every time you have more scraps until it's full. When it's full, you put the lid on, let it sit for 2 weeks. And during the sitting period, you need to use that spigot to drain off water. It will produce a lot of liquid. You drain that off at least every other day. You can use the drainage as liquid fertilizer. It's totally fine for plants. And after 2 to 3 weeks, again, much faster than normal composting, which takes like at least a month and a half or so to get anywhere. So 2 to 3 weeks, you get a pickled proto-compost. It smells kind of like vinegar. And then you can add it to an outdoor compost bin, and it'll compost further very quickly. You can bury it in soil in a place where plants aren't actively growing. Some people they call them bokashi trenches. You just dig a trench and put the stuff in and cover it in soil, and then the soil microbes get in and finish it off. The reason you don't want to put it where plants are actively growing is it's super acidic when it comes out of the fermentation process, so it'll actually kill plants unless they're super duper acid loving. And then, or you can use some kind of a container, like a big Glad or a big storage tub, to build a soil factory. You basically build layers, put some soil in, put the bokashi in, put more soil on top. So it's a lot of work, but it's an option. And that's what I have today. I think we do have a few minutes for questions, and I'm gonna, Carolyn, do you wanna kind of pass the mic? And I'll use this one to answer. Test. This one?
You can pull that one off too.
Does anybody have questions?
Hi, I have 2 questions. So, eggshells. I've been taking all the eggshells and blending them in a blender, and they're still pretty thick, but then I just throw them in the garden. Is that okay? Does that do anything?
Yeah, so eggshells are mostly calcium. And it can be a fine supplement for soil.
Okay, and then to do this outdoor composting, I have my lawn chemically treated, my true green. And I know I'm not supposed to, but I had a big problem with my lawn and now it's fine. So in the future, I want to not use it so much chemicals, but right now I have a lot of chemicals on it. So I can't do this composting using my cut lawn because it's filled with chemicals, right?
It depends what you want to use the compost for. I probably personally would not want to use like a ChemLawn treated lawn clippings for compost I was going to put on a vegetable garden. It probably, unless they're using some super long-acting pesticide that they should be telling you about, which most of them don't. It's not going to cause a problem for putting it on flower beds.
Okay, good, I can,
Yeah.
okay. And then one more question. The pre-made, not the open bin, the closed bin, the black one that you had, which bin do you think is the best? Because do those have their problems in itself too, or is there one that you would recommend? Thank you.
I'm kind of talking off the cuff here because I've personally never used one of these. I'd be a little wary of the tumbling ones. Sure.
You use it, Mike.
Is it working? I wasn't sure if it was working. It is working, okay. So the tumbling ones, it seems like those are most likely to break because they have articulation and moving parts, and are therefore most likely to need repairs. So if I had to choose one, but again, I'm a lazy composter. I'm a very lazy composter. I'm going to choose that one, and I'm just going to let it sit there until for a couple of years until it's done. I'm not.
I can add to this too. I have two of the ones up here, like the earth.
Earth machine is
Machine or something like that.
Of it, yeah.
They're easy to move around. I have to get in there. I just take a fork and spin it around there. My personal experience is that I don't really move from the bottom. If we want to get the compost out, we just pull the whole thing up and take it out of there. So I have two bins.
What's the name?
Earth machine.
Earth machine, and they're not expensive.
Where do you get it? Good, thank you.
I bought mine through King County.
Oh yeah, we used to.
Like at the extension office, but I think you can find them online.
Yeah, so right now we did have a sale this year. This one was on sale. It's made from an old olive barrel, which is kind of cool. But they're not my favorite composters. We really use them because they sell an upcycled grain barrel. And because we partner with the Conservation Foundation, that's the company they use. They chose the vendor. So I am thinking of ways to start selling better composters through the county, but I might not need to. I need to do some homework and go to Menards and Lowe's and stuff and see what they have. Because if they're out there, I don't need to do it.
I can speak up. I'm pretty loud.
Well, it helps for the video.
Okay. I have two composters. One is that's been sitting for quite some time, with the black, sealed. But the other one I just bought, and it's small, and it's kind of like the Price is Right wheel. So there's nothing moving parts. You're actually moving the circle. But that one, it's for some reason I opened it up to add something, and there's like flies. What am I doing wrong? Not little flies, like fruit flies, like tiny flies.
Are you just putting the food scraps straight on the top?
Well, that's just go. Yeah, it's like eggshells and.
I would
But you're
use-
saying no citrus, so I shouldn't be using orange rinds.
The citrus is for the worms.
Okay.
Just for a worm bin, because it turns the bin to acid for them.
Okay.
In regular compost, like in outdoor compost, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought I was in trouble there. Okay.
No, but so what's probably happening is that this is gonna sound gross, but a banana peel comes pre-laid with fruit fly eggs. That's just
Okay. So I probably don't have enough ground.
Well, no, what it is you're putting it on the top and the fruit flies are hatching and then coming up. So you need like a trowel and dig a little hole and bury your new material and then put in more browns on top.
The thing is only, I just got it at Aldi.
Okay.
And you just kind of open the thing, you just kind of pour it in and you just turn it.
Okay.
I'm constantly turning it, just, you know, to keep
Okay.
going, but I think I need to add more brown than,
Yeah, I would add more browns then if you're getting a ton of flies in there.
okay.
Anybody
Yeah.
else?
Just real quick, is the slide deck available somewhere online we can see?
No, but I can send it to folks. It's a big file. But if you give me your email address, I could send it.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned you can add food scrap to like yard waste that'll pick up a group. Is that like weekly or is that seasonally or just a couple times a year?
It's weekly during the yard waste season. So that's
Okay.
April 1st to November 30th. And you just put them in your craft bags with a sticker, or if you rent a special yard waste tote from them for, what was it, like $180 to $200 for the season, then you can use the tote.
Okay, thank you.
BHEV is here recording the presentation, so it'll be available on their YouTube page after he's done editing it. So everybody will be able to rewatch the presentation as well. So just know that that's available that way too. Any more questions?
I have a fun compost story if no one has any more questions. So I'm pretty sure in my very lazy outdoor bin, I got honeybees, like a honeybee colony. So I live about 1/8 of a mile from a place on Route 25. You maybe seen it if you drive through like North Aurora, South Batavia, that raises bees. They have hives outside. And I started my compost pile. I know a lot more about compost now than I did then, because it was before I had this job. And I put in a lot of coarse woody debris. So it's kind of like I got rid of a bunch of shrubs. My past job was in invasive plants. So I moved in and realized that the person we bought the house from had planted a ton of invasive plants. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna just kill them and compost them. So I had all these like shrub branches in there. And I added other stuff too, but it created a lot of air, like void spaces, because these pieces were so big. They weren't fitting nicely together. And it left a lot of room for, apparently, honeybees to take up residence. And I walked out there one day all proud of myself, because I'm finally going to turn my compost heap. And I put the pitchfork in, and it comes to life. The swarm comes out. And I dropped my pitchfork and booked it. But I only ran about 25 feet. And I didn't get stung once. And only 1 or 2 bees followed me, and I ran a little bit further. And yeah, I didn't end up getting stung at all. So that and just getting a close look at them is why I think they were honeybees and not ground bees. Ground bees, I would have been toast. I would have been just like in hospital probably, so yeah.
Is that common, ground bees? Because I had a similar experience where my ex-husband, he went to go turn it, and I noticed there was some movement at the bottom, and I said, hey, stop. And if he would have kept, he would have just kept. So is that more common in the piles?
It could be in in an open pile without, I'm not super sure, but ground bees are different because they're living underground, obviously. I don't know why they would prefer a compost heap to anywhere else. But yeah, definitely if you have a lot of void space in there, it does open it up to things living in it more than if you grind things a little bit more finely. But it requires equipment, you need a wood chipper to chip wood.
You mentioned invasive plants, and you said those that have seeds on it to cut them off. Can you do that with roots, with the roots on it, or should the roots be cut off too? Because I get nervous pulling different weeds out in the yard.
Yeah, if you're putting it in an open bin, you're better off chopping it up, honestly, and if it's a live weed. Because they can just reroot in your compost bin, for sure. It kind of depends on what it is, but yeah, I would say if you can separate the root, that's a good idea.
Like a honeysuckle flower?
Honeysuckle flower.
Because isn't that's an invasive.
Honeysuckle is definitely invasive, yes.
Yeah. But the flower, like if you go and cut some of it, eventually I'll get rid of it, but.
Yeah. If the problem is if they start maturing berries, then you don't really want it in your compost.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
the berries for those.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I have a lot of invasive species in my yard, and either if it's a really, really bad one, like creeping bellflower that I've been fighting for about 10 years, I'll be honest, that goes in a plastic garbage bag. And some of the other ones might just go in the municipal compost because it does get a lot hotter. I don't want to put stuff and I noticed that too because I grew some melons in my yard and stuff like that. My compost doesn't get hot enough. Some of those seedy things that we were putting in kind of sprouted in my yard.
I'll make a confession. I used chlorpyralid, which is an herbicide, because I have Canada thistle in my yard, running thistle. It's impossible. You can't pull it. Glyphosate didn't work. I'm like, you can't pull it. It just comes back, twice as much. And yeah, so I've been battling it for years, and I used a pretty strong herbicide on it, and yeah, I bagged all that up and put it in the garbage because I didn't want it to be in my compost certainly, but I didn't want it to be in the municipal compost either because that's a long-acting herbicide. Again, True Green isn't using that as a matter of course. They just don't. It's expensive, but it can survive in compost and then cause problems.
Anyone else?
Where does that, all the yard waste that goes with all our yard waste that, when the bags get taken away, where does that go?
Well, it's up to group to pick a yard waste composter. A lot of them do use Creekside Compost, which is in Sugar Grove, just because it's close. They don't have to spend as much to transport it. Some of them use Midwest Compost in Elgin and West Chicago, which I'm pretty sure that's mostly transfer stations. So they collect it there and then put it in different vehicles and move it somewhere else to be composted.
I think there was a picture of, all the plants and flowers you buy, they come in the plastic.
Yeah.
Are those recyclable or no?
No.
I hear such different information.
Yeah, well.
Why do they have to be even recyclable then?
Some of them have. So some of the larger, those like multi-cell things with the littlest seedlings, those are almost always made of polystyrene and they're always black and they're just not recyclable. But some companies have been making their plant pots white or clear. And they've been making them out of different plastics. And if you actually spend the time to clean them all, that's the hard part. They don't want them in there with dirt all over them. Those white and clear ones can be recycled, but really like the black ones and anything that's dirty and those multi-cell things, they're no bueno.
Some of the retailers are taking them back too.
Yeah, I don't know what they do with them, but.
I saw something just this year. I know Lowe's used to, but I don't think they do it anymore. But there was, I'd have to look online, but there was another company or group that were taking them basically to be reused, not recycled.
We built Dreams Greenhouse in West Chicago.
There you go. Okay.
Ooh, I'm gonna Google them.
Yeah. They like the thicker ones, but really where you purchase the plants from.
Yeah, so she said we grow dreams in West Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thanks very much.
I hope you all learned something new. I actually learned some new stuff too. If you want to come back to it, it'll be on BATV probably in the next week or two. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.